Artificial intelligence will not be used in the creation of this alien abduction video that you're about to view. Everything that you're about to see is 100% real. Get my six! Hey guys, we're on location again today for this video. I've got about an hour and a half's drive to where I'm going. I'm sworn to secrecy as far as the exact location of where these events took place, so I'm going to give you the backstory while I'm driving, some of it at least, and I'll give you more of the backstory while I'm hiking up a very steep, very long, tall mountain to get to the location where these events took place. So about a year and a half or so ago, I had a good friend of mine stop by for a couple of days. He used to live near me, but he moved away, but he came by to visit, and his first night there, we were sitting out by the pond, having some cold ones, listening to the frogs, watching the lightning bugs. We were swapping stories, and I'll tell you, he told me one that gave me chills the whole time I was listening to it, but he left me hanging. See, he left me hanging in regards to where these events took place. It is one of those stories that was just so great, you want more. And the only more I can think of, because it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, was to kind of go to where it took place and see if I could kind of poke around and figure out if it was actually true or not. But he wouldn't give me that information. However, I harangued him for the last year and a half, and we got together a couple of days ago, and he had a few too many cold ones, and he came right out and told me exactly where these events took place. So that's where we're heading today. I'm in the car, and I've got about an hour and a half's drive here ahead of me, so I figured I'd give you some of the backstory while I'm driving. So here's the story. It's a story that involves this guy's grandfather and his grandfather's best friend when they were in their mid-20s or so, late 20s. So it goes back to circa 1950s. So the story's this. My friend's grandfather had a family cabin. They used it as a hunting camp, and it was on family land, and fortunately, this allows us to be able to make this video today, the land is still in the family, so I won't be trespassing. I had been given permission, though the guy that gave me permission was drunk as a skunk when he gave it to me, but whatever, permission anyway, to visit this property and actually hike up a very steep trail to the top of a very steep mountain to get to the location of where this happened. So what is it that happened, you ask? Well, this is what happened. So my buddy's grandfather and his best friend in their late 20s were up at their hunting camp. It would have been, I guess, mid to late November. It was deer season. And, you know, a lot of folks who go to hunting camps know that there's more drinking and lying going on than there is actually hunting. And that's kind of one of the evenings they had after going out and not getting any deer. They passed out, probably 3 sheets to the wind. They're just about around midnight, a little bit before midnight. After banking the fire in the wood stove, making sure everything was going to be okay for the night, when all of a sudden, around 2 or 3 a.m., boom, there was this loud thump on top of the cabin. Woke them both up. They both sat upright in their cots and looked at each other, and one said, "Did you hear that?" And the other said, "Yeah, what was that?" Well, they figured a tree had fallen on the cabin, but they couldn't figure out why the tree hadn't, collapsed the roof or whatever. And as they were trying to figure out what it could have been, they heard what was just this guttural scream. They said it sounded like a woman being murdered, like a woman was in severe agony, shrieking at the top of her lungs, and it was coming from the top of the cabin. Well, when my buddy told me this, the first thing I thought of was mountain lion, because, we still have the occasional sightings of mountain lions here in our part of Virginia, Central Virginia, all over the East Coast, really, even though mountain lions are not supposed to exist here anymore, except for in the Everglades of Florida, where they still do have panthers. So anyway, I said that to my buddy while he's telling me the story. I said, well, it must have been a mountain lion. And I'm thinking, this is a mountain lion story. He says, well, that's what they thought too. And they heard it screaming again, and thinking it was a mountain lion, they of course were not dumb enough to go outside to see what it was. I mean, this wasn't like a B-budget horror movie where people hear something scary and say, oh, that sounds terrifying, let's go outside and see what it is. So they just pulled their blankets up to over their heads and were shuddering in fear when all of a sudden they heard this thing flop off of the roof of the cabin and kind of drag itself into the other underbrush nearby. So they're laying there and they're listening, and this thing kept screaming, and they're thinking it's a mountain lion in heat maybe, when all of a sudden the screams stop, and then they hear what sounds like a baby crying, but gurgly, almost as if a baby was crying, but it was gargling water or maybe choking. But still, this made it even creepier, so they certainly were not going to go outside to check and see what was going on. Well, as you might be able to imagine, neither of them were able to get back to sleep at all that night. So they stayed there in that cabin, and they did venture to get out of bed from time to time to put another log on the fire to make sure they didn't get cold. I mean, late November, mid to late November, top of a mountain in the Blue Ridge, it could get quite chilly. But they were waiting for the sun to come up so they could venture outside and see what the heck was going on, which they did when it was light enough to see. Firearms in tow, of course. So they go out, they're looking around, and they hadn't heard this gurgling sound for a couple of hours, and they hadn't heard any more shrieking screams since the gurgling sound started. So they were poking around in the direction from where they last heard the sounds, and they found something that just absolutely amazed them. They found what looked like a human baby, but not a newborn. It looked like it was about 2 years old, and it had a light green hue to it. And it did have hair. I mean, the way the story was passed down from the grandfather, who's been dead for a long time now, it looked like a 2-year-old child laying there in the middle of a bunch of leaves and weeds and some underbrush sleeping. They could hear it breathing. Well, they looked around to see if Mama was still around, whatever Mama was. They didn't see anything, and they were able to glance up on top of the cabin, and they saw that there was a huge dent in the top of the, it was like a tin roof, and it had claw marks on it. From where, I guess, maybe as it was falling off the tin roof, it tried to grab itself, but it had claws at the end of whatever was at the ends of its hands, fingers, who knows. So they just instinctively picked this thing up. They took it in the cabin, and they put it in a box, and they put a blanket over it. They said it never woke up, but it continued to breathe. They knew it was alive, and they were trying to figure out what in the heck do we do with this thing. And so they pretty much sat around staring at this thing all day, thinking, what in the world are we going to do with this? It didn't wake up the entire first day. They didn't go hunting. They stayed in the cabin and just watched this thing. They were considering leaving early and taking it with them, but they were kind of scared because the thing did look so human that they were afraid questions might be asked that they couldn't answer. It was going to appear as if these guys just went off somewhere, supposedly to deer hunt, and then all of a sudden come home with what looked like a 2-year-old child, minus the fact that it was a pale hue green and had hair on it, and as far as they knew, made somewhat human-like sounds from what they'd heard so far, and they were a little uncomfortable with that. So they couldn't figure out what exactly to do that day, so they ended up going to sleep that night, and then that's when things got super, super, super creepy. And I'm fixing to tell you that part of the story here in just a second. I have a very not-so-friendly tailgater on my backside here of my vehicle, so let me stop recording this and pull off and let this sucker pass, and I'll give you the rest of the story once I get a little bit further down the road, probably once I reach my final parking destination and start my hike up. It's quite a hike up to the top of the mountain. The guy actually drew me a map. Yeah, I'll tell you, he's one creative drunk. I'll tell you, if I showed you this map, I hope I don't get lost. But anyway, let me finish the story once I'm in the woods, all right? Well, guys, as you can tell, I've reached my, I'm hesitant to say final destination because I hope not. I hope to make it safely out of here today and back home this evening. But I'm in the woods on my buddy's property. It's a pretty big estate. They still own almost 1,000 acres here. You hear some dogs. Yeah, that's his distant relatives that actually do live on the property. I stopped by and introduced myself, and I said, I don't know if so-and-so told you I might stop by. And they were like, no, he never mentioned it. I said, well, I'm sorry. I can call him or text him. They said that's not necessary. They said, hey, we know he's a cousin. He said, if he says you're welcome, you're welcome. He said, and they wanted to know what I was doing. I said, well, I just want to go for a hike and, check out the And I kind of fessed up. I said, I know a little bit about the lore. He told me some of it, and I just kind of like to see the area. And they were like, oh, okay. And they kind of actually, I showed them the map he drew. They laughed. They got a kick out of it. They said it actually wasn't bad. And they kind of gave me some verbal directions. And they do have a four-wheeler trail here that they use regularly that'll take me pretty much to the... It's like somebody threw something at me. So remember, get my 6. It means watch behind me. You never know who or what you may or may not see in any of these crazy videos I make. So let's get back to the story. I'm actually pretty fit. It's just this is a pretty steep hill, pretty steep mountain. So you have to forgive me if I have to stop and catch my breath from time to time. So the guys, the grandfather and his best friend, they go to sleep for the night. When all of a sudden, it's almost identical to what happened the night before. Boom, a loud thud on the roof wakes him up. Well, this time that thing starts gurgling again. And this is where it gets really weird. So the guys are scared. Something's like banging and ripping and clawing at the top of the cabin, the tin roof up on top of the cabin. It sounded like they're trying to peel this thing open like a tin can. So while this baby is gurgling, it's also making very extremely strange sounds of another kind. And the way my friend described it is very odd. He said that his grandfather and his grandfather's friend, a man who my friend also knew before he passed, and this is going back to his childhood. And we're in our mid-50s now, but it's going quite a ways back to the 1980s, I guess. They said that it sounded like a gurgle, a baby screaming with gurgle, but then it sounded like the voices from their past. And I asked my friend, what does that mean? And he says, well, it meant different things to the two different men. And I said, what's that mean? He said, well, for example, his grandfather could hear the voice of his mother as if she was just having a normal, pleasant conversation with him from maybe when he was 8 or 10 years old. Like maybe they had been sitting around the dinner table and they're talking about their day, but it was his mother's turn to talk and she's just talking about her day. She's talking about ironing clothes or whatever. And he's looking at this thing. Again, this greenish hued, what looks like a 2-year-old baby, even though they know it had just been born the night before. But then his friend is hearing the voice of his sister or his brother from childhood, while at the same time looking at the same creature, the same being. Oh, there's a hawk. I don't know if you can see that. It actually just robbed the nest. Let me show you this. Nature is well, cruel, but beautiful. My phone doesn't zoom in as far as I wish it did, but you hear the bird screaming. There's a hawk that just robbed a baby bird. Can you see the hawk out of the nest? And it's sitting up there with it. Wow. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that's what's going on there. All right, let me reverse the camera and get back to the story. All right, back to the story. So the guys were, as I mentioned, they were hearing what sounded like voices of their past. This was the odd thing. The grandfather, my friend's grandfather, said that while the baby was gurgling, all of a sudden the sound switched to what sounded like his mother's voice from when he had been a child, maybe 8 years old. Just having a general conversation as if they were sitting around the dinner table and she was talking about her day, talking about the chores she'd done around the house, maybe a TV show she'd watched. Then his friend, same thing. It was looking at this greenish hued, hairy, what appeared to be a 2-year-old baby and hearing the gurgling. But then all of a sudden he could hear like his sister's voice from his childhood when his sister had also been a child, talking about whatever her and her friends were up to or what she was going to do for the weekend. It was the strangest thing. And the whole while, there's this thing outside on top of the, it'd come back, it thumped, like I said, it started them awake, like ripping the place open like a tin can. They were terrified, and they just knew they had to get out of there. Whatever this thing was in the cabin, they couldn't explain what it was. Whatever it was that brought it into this world, potentially getting ready to find out from another world, they couldn't explain. Even though it was the middle of the night, pitch black dark outside, they decided they had to get the heck out of there or they might not make it to see the next day. So they threw open the cabin door, took off running outside, And just past the cabin, because it was right on top of the hill, top of the mountain we're hiking up right now, but there was a clearing, and they stopped in the clearing because they saw hovering above the clearing what they described, and what my friend said in his own words, was a saucer type disc with an illuminating, like bluish, almost like an LED light style light all the way around, hovering over this field. And they just looked in awe and in amazement as it slowly began drifting right over top of them towards where the cabin was, which was just like not too far away because they hadn't run that far. They turn and they watch, and they see as like this beam of light comes down, and it like sucks up not just this thing that they got just a fleeting glimpse of that was on top of this cabin, but the whole cabin itself, except the chimney and the fireplace. My friend told me that story just like that while we were sitting there around the pond last summer having some cold ones. I was like, what? He says, yeah, that's what Grandpa says. This UFO came and sucked up the cabin, the creature on top, and that greenish-hued humanoid-looking thing inside that was gurgling and like speaking from the voices of the past. I hope y'all appreciate these videos and these stories, and the fact that I come out to these creepy locations where these stories have taken place, because it ain't so easy. And I'm telling you, I'm fit. This is like straight up this mountainside. I don't know if I could get my four-wheeler up this hill, and it's a four-wheel drive. Goodness. So they turned and they ran down this very trail. I'm sure they ran down it a lot faster than I'm walking up it. They ran all the way down till they got down to the house down there, the house I just visited, and they didn't bang on the door. They didn't want to wake anybody up. They kind of got themselves back together once they reached the field, and they spent the rest of the night on the porch. They had a couch, porch swing, whatever out there. They managed to get to sleep. Next morning, they woke up to grandfather's father coming out to check on the chickens, feed the animals or whatever, and asked them, what y'all doing down here? I thought you was up the cabin, camping. And they said, well, you know, we were up there telling each other stories, and we told some pretty good ones. Our imaginations got the best of us, and we just got scared and we came down here because they didn't want to tell them what they'd seen, what they thought they'd seen. So they had breakfast there at the house, and they hiked back up this extremely steep mountain. Man, I'll tell you, I lived on the West Coast for a while, out in Washington State, and my buddies out there would say these mountains on the East Coast were just hills. They weren't mountains. Now, in comparison to the Cascades, where I lived out there, they had a point, but I told them, you come back to the Blue Ridge or go over to the Appalachian Mountains where I grew up in West By God, Virginia, spend all day hiking, and then you tell me they're not mountains. These are mountains. So I'm gonna have to stand here and finish this up in place. Then I'll start recording again when I get back, if I'm able to find this location. So they get back up to where the cabin had been. And what I mean by that, let me slowly pan because I feel like I'm being watched. Again, get my six. You never know who or what you may or may not see in the background of these videos. What I mean by that is, when they got there, there was no cabin. The cabin was gone, all except for the fireplace and the chimney. And I told my friend, there's no way, you've got to be kidding. And in his drunken stupor, he said to me, you need to go out there and check it out for yourself. If you don't believe me, you drive an hour and a half away, hike up that hill to the top of that mountain, and you will find where this cabin used to be, and where there is still standing today the fireplace and the chimney, which is the only thing that the UFO left behind. It literally abducted the cabin, which had been there for like almost a century. Originally, it was the original home of their family's ancestors who had settled the land. It was the first house. They were part of the original pioneers. I think they were German in descent. They'd come down from Pennsylvania to this part of Virginia to settle. And he said the only thing anybody could figure was that the chimney and the fireplace was just too heavy. the UFO couldn't lift it, or maybe it was because that's not what it needed. It was there to get the beings, the mother that had given birth to this odd creature the night before. And they just said they were happy that they weren't abducted along with the cabin. And so I said to my friend, I'm like, how did your grandfather and his friend explain that? And they said, well, my grandfather had to tell his family, because how do you just dismiss the fact that an entire cabin that had stood for a century top of a mountain just vanishes? So when they made it back off the hill that day, they told, the family. The grandfather told his father, his mother, and the siblings that were there, and they listened. They didn't laugh. They didn't even doubt him, because the grandfather's father had mentioned that he had seen strange things, and he had his whole life. Strange lights in the woods. And he says, listen, let's walk up there. Let's have a look-see. I'm not going to judge you without viewing the evidence myself, and we'll go from there. So he walked up to the top of this mountain, and I'm getting closer to the top, and they saw that the entire cabin was gone, except the chimney and the fireplace. And he turned to his son and his son's best friend, and he said, boys, there's one way we can handle this, and only one way. And they said, what way is that? And they said, you are to never, ever, ever tell a soul of these events that took place last night. And clearly they did. They kept the story within the family. It's leaked a few times, such as when my buddy told me after a few too many beers last summer, and then I got him to fess up again here just recently, the rest of the story as far as location goes. And so now I'm up here in the middle of the woods on top of this mountain, trying to find where this cabin used to be, going by this old map he drew literally with, no pun intended here, but with the crayon, and which his family that I just met down there actually confirmed. So I need to catch my breath. I'm going to poke around in these woods and see if I can find where this cabin used to be. I guess I'll know I found it if I am able to find this chimney and a fireplace in the middle of the woods in the middle of nowhere and nothing else. And if so, we're going to be able to confirm that this story is true. So guys, I made it to the top, and I've been walking around for a while. So if it's up here, we should be close. And I was just thinking about some of the other parts of the story that my buddy told me that his grandfather had told him. And, I'd mentioned earlier that the grandfather's father had told him he'd always kind of experienced strange things up here. Some of those strange things being like strange sounds, hoops, hollers in the middle of the night, tree knocks. It's a creepy spot, and wow. Guys, we found it. Look right behind me. That is what appears to be a chimney. Here, let me reverse the camera. Let's investigate. Sure enough, you see that stone column? Right here in the middle of the woods, where, according to this tale, a cabin stood for roughly a century, the original cabin, till the 1950s, when the entire cabin, with the creature clawing at the roof and the baby whatever inside, was abducted through this clearing by a UFO. Again, with all the strange events that have been witnessed in this area, we can't be too careful. But let's investigate. Wow. Guys, I can see where the original foundation of a house had been. But this is the proof. The evidence and the proof that the only thing not taken in the abduction was the fireplace and the chimney. Wow, this is incredible. Could you imagine the terror of being in what was such a small space? It looks like probably 15 feet out this way, maybe 10 or 12 this way, a 12 by 18, more than likely. Now back then, the original settlers, they did not make big homes, because the bigger the space, the more wood you had to burn to heat it, and the harder it was to keep it warm in the winter. So they would build what would appear to be a oversized fireplace or wood stove. You could see a metal beam there. It looks like at one point they built a wood stove into this, or maybe that was just the hearth. But they wouldn't want to build too big of a cabin because it was just too hard to heat it and keep it. Did you hear that? No, not the cackling of that pileated woodpecker. There was something over here. Could you imagine the terror those guys felt while that thing was clawing at the roof, and then they came out here? This is where the original trail would have been. You can tell how it's been cut out over the hillside here. Running down this at full speed, and then looking up into the sky and seeing a hovering disc with a beam. I heard something again. Right over here. It's coming from over here. Oh, it's up there. I saw movement. Look, there's an X. Is that a grave? Marked with an X. Oh my gosh. Is that another grave? Guys, I think we found an unmarked grave site in the middle of the woods. Guys, this is a creepy, creepy place. I'm getting a creepy, creepy feeling. I literally just felt the temperature drop by like 10 degrees. What is that? Are these graves? There's multiple graves up here. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wait, did you hear that? There's another one. There's another grave. There's another grave. My friend did not tell me about this. 1, 2, 3. 3 stone graves. What in the heck is this place? What is this place? What? Wait a minute. Did you see that? Did you hear that? We're not safe here. I found what we're looking for. It's time to get out of here. There is something up here, and I don't want any part of it. My friend did not tell me the entire story. There's more to this story, and we're gonna go get the rest of it. We'll see you for more next time from the most amazing homesteading channel on the planet. It typically doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with homesteading. Homesteading off the grid. I'm running all the way home.